Good morning, Anne.
Morning, James.
And good morning, everybody. Thank you for listening. So, we're here again Sunday morning, Anne and myself. Now, if you haven't listened before, for the next half an hour or so, we are just going to have an organic, natural conversation, hopefully interesting, and share it with you. And we'll take it from there, to be honest with you. I know a number of you are returning again, and we can't thank you enough for all of your encouragement, support, feedback, questions. It's so appreciated, particularly in these early episodes as we're finding our feet and we're finding our way moving forwards. So thank you to everybody listening this morning. And I think we'll set sail, Anne.
Okay,
thank you. Off we go.
I'd like to talk about something from last week.
Yes.
Which is personal responsibility. This is something that's very important to me.
Yes.
And it's part of my life. So personal responsibility, when does it start? I've wondered about this today quite a bit. Does it start as an adult or does it start as a child? For me, I can only give an example from one of my children who was a biter.
Okay.
And she was between 2 and 3, and she went through a phase of biting. And nothing would stop her. So in the end, the only way, which in those days, this did happen. I know many people might find it horrifying, but this was the only way in those days. So I had to bite her to make her understand that it hurt. She didn't know it hurt.
Yes.
She's a little toddler, so she didn't know what pain was.
Yes.
And that to me is one of the worst things I've ever done, was to bite her. I didn't find it easy.
No.
So was that personal responsibility for me and also personal responsibility for her? I do wonder sometimes, because both of us were learning a lesson.
I was going to say it was a life lesson for you both, an interesting one. I'm sure a lot of parents and grandparents will relate to that situation or a similar situation, particularly the terrible twos, and boundary setting and teaching a lesson and breaking a behaviour pattern that is destructive, harmful, hurtful, and how to go about that. It certainly isn't easily answered, is it, Anne?
No.
And you're outlaying it as if at the time and even still today, excuse me, it was a challenge both in terms of to do and then to reflect upon with your conscience whether it was the correct thing to do. Was it effective? Did it work?
It definitely worked. Yes, it did work. She didn't bite again.
Yes.
And of course, I had a very wise grandparent.
Yes.
This was 1958, coming up to 1960 this would be.
Wow.
So there weren't the nurseries and the places there are today for children. So children were brought up more in a community.
Yes.
Of grandparents. All of my family lived in the same street.
Yes.
So there was always somebody there that could advise you.
Mm.
And obviously we follow by example. And I was lucky I had a very good example. And she didn't do it again.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And it's something that has changed. You've lived through it. And I mean, that wealth of wisdom and experience, I don't think there is an actual value that we can place upon that. In lots of ways, communities have broken down, haven't they? And the challenges for parents at any age, but particularly young parents, and to feel isolated and to be looking around for support, for guidance, for wisdom, and sometimes for correction as well, with good intent, in terms of people guiding us and putting us on the right path. And this is true in all areas of life, not just in parenting, but since you started out this morning, very interestingly, with a reflection on your own life with your own children and personal responsibility in that context. Who do we turn to? Who can people turn to? And also the harshness of life as well. So if anybody, to be honest with you, but if a parent in the eyes of somebody else makes a mistake, how much compassion is there? How much love is there in action to support and to guide? Because in a sense, you were a child raising a child, weren't you?
Yes.
You weren't very old yourself, certainly in today's parenting
No, at that time...
numbers in terms of the age that people have children today.
At that time, I would be 20.
20 years.
20 years old.
Wow.
And she was 2.
Yes.
So yes, an example of what you've just said, though, with parents, grandparents giving advice, is my grandmother came to my house just after I'd had my second child, who was born with a problem that meant I had to feed her for 4 hours. It took me 4 hours to feed her.
Wow.
And I was in the bedroom, and I think in this day and age, this is just another example of what did happen in those days. And I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but she came to the house when she was 10 days old, and I was in the bedroom feeding, hadn't got dressed. And she said, "What are you doing up here?" And I said, "It's taken me 4 hours to feed her." And she shouted downstairs to my husband and said, "Go out and get some milk and some eggs, milk and eggs."
Yes.
And when he went out of the door, she said, "That's what you're going to give her from today," which wouldn't happen today, to feed her. She's got to have nothing else.
So this is cow's milk and eggs.
Cow's milk and raw egg.
Mixed together.
Right,
okay.
Not cooked or anything.
And how old was your daughter at this point?
She's 10 days old.
10 days, right, okay.
10 days old.
Wow.
And she would need an operation pretty soon, and this will build her up.
Okay.
But that wasn't the reason she'd done it. This is the way it worked in those days.
Yes.
As soon as my husband had gone out of the room, she said to me, "Right, get dressed, get some makeup on, do your hair and go downstairs. That young man that's gone out there is your priority, not this child. He will be with you for the rest of your life. This child has to have her own life and grow her own strength." So there were wise words in those days. Very hard to do, but wise words.
It feels like maybe not completely 180 degrees to the opposite, but certainly it feels like to me a shift not far off completely the opposite of that. That mindset, that attitude is gone now. That the priority for people now in terms of thought would be the child.
Yes.
But in a sense, and I think this is where we started, and I want to clarify this, that absolutely the child is the priority, but in a different way. The child is a priority in as so much as nurturing the child, giving the child strength, giving the child love, but also giving the child space. Yeah. And through the passage of their childhood, building responsibility, independence, so the child can become a fully fledged independent human being rather than dependent and attached to parents. Have I understood that?
Yes.
I mean, that's ideologically put out, but in a sense, isn't this an ideological exploration, really? And everybody will have deep, sharp, supportive and disencouraging opinions about all of this, because it really is an emotive subject, isn't it? It's a subject of which everybody has their thoughts and feelings on, rightly so, but sometimes those thoughts and feelings can be very, very different. And we're exploring your personal experience. Yes. I don't have this personal experience in a direct way. So I don't have the same authority as you do in terms of a personal direct experience. And I'm not here to question you or any other mother about anyone's inner knowing about what feels right in any given moment. I find it fascinating and interesting and truly enriching. And I think the more we learn to listen to each other, the more we'll learn, the more we'll remember. And the richer we will be, richer in a sense of the depth of our experience, our collective experience and our collective wisdom, our human communal wisdom shared together from being able to converse with each other and hear each other's concerns, hear each other's experiences, even when they directly challenge our own experiences. There is enormous amount of potential and growth and the flourishing of compassion that can take place. And I feel that we've lost that a little bit. And also, I do think what we're touching upon, if this is right, and please stop me and correct me if I'm misinterpreted, maybe one way this is shaping in our world, is that we're too soft in our mindset to life itself. We're trying to shelter children from becoming independent because we don't want anything to hurt them, which seems like a natural thought process to put in place, but that isn't necessarily how life is. Life happens whether we like it or not, and if we are not instilling in children the attitude to life that is independent in thought and independent in action, with a resilience of strength within each individual, then they're not equipped, they're not ready, they're not in a place, in a sense they're perpetual children.
Yes.
In what is not healthy as a child. As in previous conversations that you and I have had, in previous conversations in these podcasts we've had, I've certainly highlighted directly that we are invited to be like children again. But I mean that in the context of imagination and a wonder and awe towards life, and to not bring into every moment our preconceived ideas of before. So we have a fresh set of eyes, a fresh disposition to almost relive each moment anew with a freshness, and everything is alive and vivid. I know that's romanticizing it a little bit, but it is like that to a child, but not in the neediness and the dependence that children can have, which at a certain age is perfectly natural. But once we move into other stages in our life, when we're becoming towards adulthood, if we've not shifted away into our independent thought, into our own independent lives, with our own inner resilience, the other side of being a child is not healthy. So there are lots of children that are still children to their parents, who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're still defaulting to being like children, and their parents still treat them like young children. And that's not my business, that's not your business, that's other people's lives. And who are we to question or tell anybody? I'm not, and I sincerely hope that nobody's taking it as such. But it does appear that that's not healthy, and that we've lost our spine a little bit, and we've lost our backbone, haven't we? Same thing, really. But
we have.
If that's how I've
I
explained
think,
it, hopefully clearly.
I think for me, and maybe because I was a very, very young mother and had a very wise grandmother, for me, I am the guardian of my children, but I'm not the keeper of my children.
That's interesting.
I am there to guard them.
So maybe language needs to shift
I think
slightly.
Maybe a little bit, yes. And
that's interesting.
With living in the same area in the same street.
Yes.
You have plenty of people we had plenty of people to bounce off. And it sounds like, hardship, people look back and think it was hard.
Yes.
Or it was hard for me as a child. It wasn't hard. And I have spoken before about it. But when you all live in the same street and you're all in terraced houses, toilets are all outside, and, life can be quite fun. It can be quite fun. And my grandmother was a diabetic.
Yes.
And she was diabetic from birth, so she was insulin dependent. So she used to be putting these enormous needles in her body all the time, the insulin. But she used to go to the Fox, which was the local pub, and drink pints of mild. She used to eat cakes.
Right, okay.
And they used to say,
so everything they probably told her not to do.
Everything that she shouldn't do, she did.
Right, okay.
And one day somebody said to her, "Why do you keep having all the cakes and drinking the pints when you're such a diabetic?" And she said, "Because I have the advantage of being able to control it with my insulin." So she controlled it, so she just gave herself more insulin or less insulin.
Okay.
Today we'd be really bothered about whether we're doing the right dose. She didn't. She just gave herself the dose of what she thought she wanted.
Yes.
And one day during the war, she, as I say, we didn't have any cakes, we had nothing. And her sister came over just after the war.
Yes.
And everything was rationed. And she brought Quality Street with her. A box of Quality Streets. And she used to sit on a chair, and my brother and my cousin and myself used to sit on the settee watching her. Put every sweet in her mouth, and she never offered us one. Not one. And we would just sit there being really good, expecting one.
With respect, that sounds a little bit mean.
It was very, very mean. But my grandma hadn't seen her. She hadn't seen her for years.
Right, okay.
And then she came in unexpected because she was out working.
Yes.
She came out in unexpected, looked at us three and said, and we got very excited because we thought, oh, she's going to give us a sweet now. She'll give us one.
Yes.
And she said, haven't you had one of those? And we all said no. And she put the lid on the box. And the sister looked at her, get upstairs, get your case and get out of the house. And she threw her out of the house.
Oh,
just
right.
onto the street.
Oh, so it was mean then.
So yeah. So there were instances like that where
Yes.
we were all, because you're all on the same street, everybody's out watching.
Yes. So a real alive community.
Yeah.
Yes.
But good, bad or indifferent. So
Yes.
if somebody was having a row with the wife, they'd have a row in the street. If
Yeah.
you're having a sing-song, all the pianos came out on the street.
Yes. So you lived, and this has been said, but just in case this is
Yeah.
the first time that anybody is tuning in, and thank you for tuning in, you lived and grew up in inner city Manchester, is that
Yes,
right?
Bradford, Manchester.
During
yes.
the Second World War, this was your
Yes.
formative years, and rows of terraced houses,
Yes.
and that's the backdrop, the stage that is set for life. And it really is life, isn't it? The
It
good,
was life,
the good,
yeah.
the bad, the ugly, but it was alive. And
Yeah, it was
I
alive.
do think we've lost that a little bit, or a lot in a lot of cases. We're so isolated, aren't we?
We-
I think that's what I'm saying underneath everything, is that we live our lives in isolation. We live our lives in cocoons with our set group of people who often are echo chambers for our way of thinking. And we very rarely cross paths with people that think differently, behave differently. And if we do, we sort of either naturally...
Politically correct.
Well, politically correct is slightly different, yes.
But we have...
We have
this is-
become politically correct as a
We have.
society, yes, we have become politically correct. Maybe we should focus less on what is political and correct and more on what is wise and true based on our own conscience.
Oh, this is fun.
Because if we're looking at politics as our arena of correctness, I'm not sure whether or not that's the best place to place correctness, is it? Because if you look at the
No.
actual term itself, politically correct, politics is full of lies and deceit, control and manipulation, coercion. The more they're wrong, the more they talk.
Yes.
And correctness, well, who decides what's correct and who decides what's wrong? So that's a subjective subject. So it's interesting, isn't it, political correctness?
Yes.
It'd be interesting to focus on, like you said, to start this conversation, personal responsibility, which again is subjective, but it's certainly personal and it's our responsibility. And what is wise and what is true based on our own conscience and our shared conscience together. And if we do not engage in conversations, if we're not sharing our ideas, and if we're not hearing ideas that challenge us, and if we're not engaging in conversations that explore new ideas, if there isn't that freedom of thought, if there isn't that freedom of expression, and if we're not in that wonderful dynamic situation where ideas are coming together and concepts are moving around each other, imagination will not thrive, innovation will be starved, and our human spirit will be stunted. Because that is what makes life great, is that we open the space up and we allow a conversation to take place. We allow ideas to move and we allow people to think, to feel and to live out their lives. And the other side of that, and I'm absolutely for it, is to foster and encourage a maturity to have such a level of freedom. To have such personal responsibility is a freedom that is ours to cherish, but it must be upheld. And if we don't hold it dearly and if we don't express it freely, we will lose it. We will lose it.
But we had children here last night, didn't we? We had a games night.
Yes, we had our
Stride for Truth.
Yeah, so we had our chess and games night, our community chess and games night, although I don't think a game of chess was played last night. So all ages come, and from young children all the way up to 60, 70, 80, 90-year-olds. And we all play different games together, and we've got card games taking place, chess and drafts. Chinese checkers have been played, and last night there was a bridge club that was started, which sounded like quantum physics, I think. I've not played bridge before, but it was fascinating to hear about it, and I think those that were playing it were saying it really is, it's one to get your mind around, but very, very addictive once you get into the flow of it.
But
So
we had children on our
we
table,
did. We had
didn't
children.
we?
So we were playing blackjack round the table. There was about 6 or 7 of us, boys and girls, men and women, all different ages.
And the children the children were
Yes.
out to get us all. But
Right,
really out to get us.
Yeah.
And, talk about cheating, isn't it? But the thing is, they knew every one of our cards, didn't they? They were quicker than us, weren't they?
Well, that's because they look at all of our cards.
I know, but to remember them at that age. One's
Yes.
only 8.
Yes, absolutely.
And she was determined.
She was determined. And the personalities are thriving.
Yes.
And again, we're counterbalancing that between fair play, decency. But what we love to see is life, is to see light in the eyes, a spirit that's alive, a combativeness in personality, in feeling that is alive and fun and thriving.
Conversation.
Conversation.
So they can hold a conversation.
Absolutely. Quickness of mind, humour. So it's all alive and good. And it really is. I mean, it's everything. And I mean, I'm sure Cheryl will have a few things to say about this, but she certainly fosters an atmosphere of contempt and danger because she winds them up. Cheryl, she says I cheat, but I can assure you now that I do not cheat. And I sit next to Cheryl to make sure that she plays the game properly. And the kids are on to Cheryl. And don't you be writing something underneath this now, Cheryl, saying something otherwise. Those children know.
Yeah.
No, I'm pulling your leg, Cheryl. I love you. I'm pulling your leg.
And they are, they make it fun.
They do
Children
make
it fun.
They make it really fun.
So, as adults, we're not here just to say, sit down, read your cards, you can't do this, you can't do that. You have boundaries. Everybody has boundaries, but children, sometimes you've got to let them have that off that leash a little bit, haven't you?
Yes.
That they can have fun. They're not being disrespectful.
No.
Again, it's knowing the mind.
Yeah, it's a fine line, isn't it? It is a fine line, one of which
is
difficult and imperfect, and everybody is doing their best in life, and it's very difficult to define where that is. But yes, if we don't give some space and freedom, how is a personality going to develop? And how is a sense of humour going to develop? How is a quickness of wit and mind going to develop? How are we going to foster a community where the young and the old talk to each other?
Yes.
Because if they don't share a common space, and if they don't share a common language, and if we don't find a way of communicating, and if that language and that space is not fostered in a spirit of fun and enthusiasm, what's the incentive to engage with it for any of us of any age? So we're too focused on what is correct. We're too focused on what is appropriate, and we're less focused on actually feeling each other and being in each other's space. And I don't mean we should all sit on top of each other, not at all. And nor am I talking about an absence of decency, respect, politeness, manners, human goodness, the dignity and the integrity that we are hopefully fostering as well. And that certainly is on show in the children as well. It's a balance. It is a balance. But life is life. Life is life. And if we don't have humour, and if we don't have enthusiasm, and if we don't enjoy play, and we don't appreciate beauty, and if we don't bring imagination into life with creativity, and if we can't cherish the sound of a child laughing, and if we can't enjoy a deep and meaningful conversation, and if we can't enjoy each other's presence, and we can't feel the warmth of our human connection, then what is the point of life? What's it all for? What's it all about?
I can remember coming out of I took my granddaughter to America, and coming out it rains. It's a certain time, 4:00. It's torrential rain in Florida. It's always the same time.
It certainly is at the moment.
Yeah, and they closed Disney. We were in Disney and they closed Disney.
All right, okay.
And the rain is so bad, as we came out of Disney itself to the car park, it was flooded.
Yes.
There was all these great big massive puddles and things, and she stood looking at them, a little bit scared. She was only very young, a little bit scared. And my husband and I were there, and I looked at her and watched the people all going round these puddles.
Yes.
And then my husband and I both jumped right into the biggest puddle got absolutely wet through. And the faces of everybody in Disney was amazing. But she immediately jumped in after us.
Yes.
Because
But
she
isn't
knew it
that
was
the
all
most
right.
obvious thing to do with a puddle?
For me.
To jump right in the middle of it.
Yeah. And then suddenly all the other children coming out of Disney were jumping in the puddles.
Yes.
And
how many of them will remember that and not the rides?
Won't remember the rides.
I mean, and life provides that wonderful adventure in every moment, and there is a payoff for that. Wet socks is a payoff.
Wet clothes.
Wet clothes, right? Okay, yeah. So obviously, life provides its difficulties, but it's fostering that attitude of what's a problem, what is a problem, and how do we deal with problems? Because we define so much of life as a problem, and problems are to be avoided.
And whose problem is it?
Yes, and to be corrected, and that there is a problem if there is a problem.
Yeah.
But if things are life, and life is life, it's the change in mindset, the change in attitude, which maybe we can go on to a little bit more and explore in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
One subject just to touch upon, I don't think we'll have time this morning, Anne, but certainly in the weeks to come, it's something I've been thinking about a lot. I don't know how many of you have been watching this, but the Dog's House, or the Dog House, I think it's on Channel 4 on a Sunday evening, a Sunday or Monday evening. I think it's a Sunday evening. So it'll be on this evening. And it really touches me.
Yes.
And I know a number of you will have dogs or will have lived with dogs. And I know as a nation, in terms of the British nation, but certainly around the world, it's a cliche to say, but the human relationship with dogs is so moving and so profound. And there's so much we can learn from an animal. And in this particular instance, a dog. It's difficult to describe. And I'd like to maybe talk about that a little bit more. I don't think we've got time this morning. So certainly people can reflect upon it. But life teaches us all of the time. It's remembering that we have such a connection with the world around us. And in a previous episode, we talked about trees. And there's such an obvious, real, symbiotic connection, relationship with trees that humans have fostered over millions of years. And potentially longer if we're to look at a different arc of evolution. But look at the relationship, at least reflect upon the relationship between the dog and human beings. And that relationship over thousands and thousands of years has been fostered in a shared relationship.
The best example of unconditional love.
Yes. I mean, I don't know if I've ever loved deeper, to be honest with you. And I know that might sound, I don't know, naive maybe, or impossible to understand for anybody that hasn't lived with a dog and connected and bonded with a dog, but it's very difficult to put into words. There is a purity. I can't do it justice in words. I can't, but it's so real and it's so true. And I feel it represents the best of humanity. And we can turn towards that in our thoughts. So I'd like to say thank you to all of the animals that are listening this morning, to the dogs, to the cats, and to all of the other animals that may be listening, and to the animals of the earth that are listening. And I don't mean that in a removed or sort of esoteric, elevated, particular way. I mean it in a real sense, that as nature is around us, the animals in our lives are around us, and there is such love that is held, and there is such wisdom that is held, and such fun and life and goodness, that we have over-intellectualized life. We've over-theorized it. We've overthought it. It's become so problematic that sometimes a walk with a dog or a cuddle and a snuggle with a dog is all you need in the world ever. And anyone who's ever had a dog or is now with a dog understands that perfectly, or I sense that you do.
Beyond the beyond.
It is beyond the beyond. So maybe we can discuss that next time.
We can do that next time, yeah.
So I'd like to leave it on that, hopefully uplifting note. And if you haven't seen the Dog's House or the Dog House, I'm not quite sure which one it's called. It's a bit of a tearjerker, but it really is life-affirming and uplifting. It's moving. So check it out. Well, there we go. That was interesting, as always. So thank you, everybody. I hope and trust that you have a wonderful Sunday and that you have a wonderful rest of this week. Thank you again for all of your support, your comments, your questions, your encouragement. Please forgive me, Cheryl. Your halo's in the post, don't worry. I'm only pulling your leg. Have a lovely week, everybody, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.